Welcome to GAbSmacked, and a special hello to Two Tank Frank, who has joined us. Absolute pleasure to see everybody here. No Tifa, no Tifa. Alrighty, so let us talk about Syria. So I'm going to hide the chat because Queen Notifa, one of our GoFundMe supporters for the book, is asking about Syria. And of course, as we know from the book and from Scopes, I have been to Syria quite a fair bit. And the first time I was in Syria, I was arrested held at gunpoint for, it felt like ages, but it probably was only around an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. And I was accused of being a Jewish spy. Number one, I'm not a spy. Number two, I'm not Jewish, so who knows what happened there. But autism has a lot to do with that stuff. Obviously, I've learned now how to mimic human behavior, so it's a little bit easier to pass as a regular human. All right, the next few times I went to Syria, I loved Syria. Loved the people. The people were just amazing. It was a very, very secular country, and the reason it was secular is because when you have countries with a huge amount of minorities, the only way to keep it stable is when you have a dictator in charge who basically murders terrorists and their whole families. And that's how you stop future terrorists. So that's what basically happens. And that's why as America becomes more prone to attacks, the leader will become more and more hard-ass. The second last leader of Syria, the father of Bashar al-Assad, these terrorists hid in a mosque, so he blew up the whole mosque. Innocent, guilty, it didn't matter. He wiped them all out. Anyone left, he tortured them. He killed their families. Like, that's how ruthless this guy was, right? So it's sort of like what you'd see in a movie. Like if there was terrorists hidden in a suburb, he would massacre the whole suburb with nerve gas or whatever. He just killed the whole suburb, because that way it would stop people from hiding the terrorists in their communities. So if you saw a terrorist in your community, you would not stay quiet. You would actually go and report them straight to the government. Now, the other thing in Syria, that the way that it was run, was that every second or third person, well, that's how it felt, you don't know if it's true, was actually secretly reporting to the government, and that people would report on their own families. So you wouldn't know who was reporting on you or who wasn't. You couldn't say anything. You couldn't say the president's name on the phone because you might disappear. There would be, on every second building, there'd be a poster of the president, with like sunglasses, and he's like going like that, or holding like a machine gun or whatever, and it'd be like, long live the president, and long live Syria, Syria, may Syria keep us safe, all these propaganda everywhere. So pretty similar to everywhere else in the world. Oh man. So anyway, so Syria was a minority run country, and most of the terrorism was stomped out because the leader himself was of a minority ethnic religious group called the Alawiyya, or you call them Haloweens, the Alawites. And so this worked for all of the minorities. So for the Christians, for the Shiites, for the Sunni heretics. But for the mainstream, that did not work, and that was heretical as a nation. And it was a bit of a problem because them being hated by the Saudis, and the Saudis being on the side of America for whatever reason, that part I can't comment on. Excuse me. They were allied with people like Russia, Russia has so many open borders everywhere that they are more focused on security. That's normally what happens, by the way. The more your borders are, the less natural borders you have, the more psycho the leader becomes, because basically they always have to defend them militarily. So and then what happened in Lebanon when Israel withdrew, the Christian militia was wiped out, and Hezbollah took over. And Hezbollah took over South Lebanon, and they have been there ever since. They have made a deal with the majority of Christians in Lebanon, so that the Christians can be kept safe, because as you guys know, Christians tend to be, like everywhere, pussies, and that's because their faith doesn't allow them to really fight back. And so the Shiites protect them So it's sort of like choose one religion of peace over the other. And there has been a little alliance forming. And that alliance was forming between Iran, Hezbollah, most of Lebanese Christians, and the Syrian regime. Syrian's economy was based on Iran. Its cars were received from Iran. Like basically, it was all an Iranian-backed economy and Russian. And that does not sit well with the other powers that are siding with American foreign policy, which is an absolute and abject disaster for anyone who's not a mainstream Sunni Muslim in the Middle East. Ironically, American foreign policy, as far as I've been alive, and my father and my father's father, has always been against minorities in the Middle East. Why? I'm not going to get involved in that. All right. So there has always been a desire to ethnically cleanse Syria of all of its minorities by the mainstream Sunnah Saudi Arabian Wahhabist style regime. And that regime in Saudi Arabia is an expansionist regime. And it's not necessarily the leaders of Saudi Arabia, it could be the people, right? Because the leaders are actually more moderate than the people in Saudi Arabia. And in Iran, it's the reverse. All right. So these ethno-religious factions, including the Kurds, all of these people have had this stable but very, very, very close to unstable union in Syria, which was kept by force by the dictator. And the only way to destroy that is to get rid of the dictator and then allow Syria to implode by having the factions get turned on by an invading faction from outside. So I was in Syria in 2000, and my last trip to Syria was 2012. It was about August of 2012. And I'm sitting in this amazing cafe that was in buildings that are like 2,000-3,000 years old, right? And it's absolutely, in Damascus, absolutely beautiful. And most people that I ever met were quite secular, even though women could still not ride scooters because they were called sluts for riding scooters, right? So that's one thing. But a lot of people were basically atheist, right? Or secular, or, you know, nominally something, right? So I'm having a coffee with this, and the waiter was like, spoke perfect English, and he learned it from watching subtitles on American TV shows. And he's talking to me, freaking intelligent guy. And he was telling me about reports up at the north of Syria on the Mediterranean, south of Turkey, where these radical Islamists guys were coming in. He calls them bearded freaks, coming in and were slicing up Syrian people. And up on the Mediterranean coast, Syria, south of Turkey, north of Lebanon, which is not far from Cyprus, basically everyone up there is very, very, very moderate. They're like, you know, like they smoke, they drink, they don't wear hijabs. They're like very, very beautiful, beautiful, beautiful people. And they were starting to get massacred for being heretics. So that was the first thing I thought that was strange. And I had to get out of Syria, actually, because what happened was that I don't know who they were, but there was some sort of rebel force had circled Damascus. So the only way I could get out, they shut down flights. I had to get back into Lebanon and then come back from there back to Australia. So they were able to sneak me out. And I've told this story before, so I won't tell it now. But they got me out, and we got back overseas. All right, so basically what's happened now in Syria is that because of the undermining of the government by American foreign policy, for whatever reason, I'm not saying good or bad, I'm saying whatever reason they have, right? They were deliberately undermined. It's actually strengthened Hezbollah in Lebanon, because Hezbollah have now taken over the south of Lebanon, but they still say that they are following the Lebanese secular army first. But the problem is they are more powerful than the army in Lebanon. So if they wanted to, they could take Lebanon over. But they never have, and they swear that they never will, right? Whatever that means, right? Take it as you want. I'm not saying good or bad, right? But what's happened is the Christians in Lebanon, right, who basically were the majority in Lebanon up until, when I was born, right? They are now allying with Hezbollah, because Hezbollah are the only people powerful enough in the region to stop ISIS from coming into Lebanon. Because the Sunni Muslims in Lebanon, obviously not all, only a minority, but a minority of the Sunni Muslims in Lebanon want ISIS to come in and clean Lebanon of being it's still in nominally a Christian country, right? They want to destroy all of the Christian artifacts. Lebanon's basically all churches everywhere, massive statues of Marys and Jesus, and it's got all the Roman ruins. It's got all the top universities in the region. 50 years ago, it was still one of the most advanced countries in the world. So this is what happens, of course, as people who are secular Western Christian move out of the country, get away, and have less children, and it doesn't take long. It only takes like 3 or 4 generations. All right, so what's happened now in Syria is that Assad is now even more supported by minorities because they're absolutely scared to death of ISIS. Hezbollah has now risen to even higher power in Lebanon. The Christians are now allied with them. So together, Hezbollah and the Christians are now the majority in Lebanon, right? So now they've become stronger. That means Iran's presence in Lebanon has become stronger. Russia's presence has become stronger. The Sunni parts tend to side with America, and it's just a big shit fight. So now I'm going to open chat again, and we'll see what we're saying. All right, liberal guy, he hit chat. Hello, sup, my friend. Okay, got it. Anyway, now Queen Notifa, go ahead. You had more questions about what's going on. Would you like to ask any further questions? Holy crap. It's funny because I thought everyone knew this stuff. So I'm going to say Dimitrios, Michelle, Bio, Simon, Liran, A, Tamara, Alinka, Adrian, 2Tank, Tracy, and Terima. Hello to all of you. So yeah. Any other questions? How are Christians treated in Syria? Under the Assad regime, all religions were treated the same in the sense that don't put your shit on anyone, otherwise we'll kill you. And everyone's been living like that ever since. So, like I remember in the middle of Damascus, I was outside of a Greek Orthodox church on the Sunday. Your popularity on Periscope would grow dramatically. I did that. Okay. That's an awesome idea. So what? I just give them my Australian number, do I? Or Hezbollah, for most people there, is the better choice. Yes. But at the same time, Hezbollah are constantly bombing Israel. And motivation of Hezbollah. All right, so there's 2 official motivations. There's one that Hezbollah says is true, and then there's one that the Sunni and the minority Christians in the north of Lebanon are believed to be true. So in the 80s, and I think it was 1986 or 82, I can't remember, but Hezbollah was this small terrorist group led either Skype or another website that does not need people to download anything. All right, let's talk about that. If you want to message me on Facebook, let me know, and I'll definitely do that. And I'll definitely be calling you in, you bugger. You're coming in first caller. All right. So, my neck. Sorry. So from Hezbollah's perspective, let me hide the chat so I can answer you. From Hezbollah's perspective, they made an official statement in the 80s saying they wanted to turn Lebanon into a Shiite Islamic state. And back at that time, the Christian militia still dominated the country, right? Before they had to escape to Israel and are living under Mossad protection, right? So basically the Christians said, if you mess with us, we're going to slaughter you, right? So because by the 80s, the Christians had been suffering terrorist attacks for 40 years, so they had become mental. Like Tommy Robertson times 1,000 with these people, like maniacs, just maniacs. And they started, anyone who was like not Christian enough, they started killing anyone who like was like a Muslim or a fake leftist. Like even the leftists, they were shooting ahead, they wouldn't care. So anyway, they took over the country, and Hezbollah said that's what I want to do. By the time the Ehud Barak in 2003 withdrew Israeli troops from South Lebanon, and therefore the Christians lost all their power, because the Christians and Israel were like wrapped like brothers, sort of, I guess, or enemy of my enemy, or whatever you want to call it. They withdrew, and that left the Christians open, because the Christian militia wasn't notified properly of the Israeli withdrawal. So Hezbollah quickly took over all of the Christian posts and wiped them all out. Because this comes from my underlying hypothesis that Christians in general will always die out, because in every single war that Christians have led, it's always after at least a few generations of getting murdered. So for example, the Crusades were a response to 400 years of getting attacked by mainstream Islamic warriors. Anyway, so by the time 2003 came around, Hezbollah said, We want Lebanon to remain united. We want to back Christians because we know this is a Christian country. We don't want to change it, even though, even though they are now outnumber the whatever Christians are left there. We just want Lebanon to be for Lebanon, and we want to liberate it from Israel. And they accused Israel of stealing like billions or millions, whatever, of tons of water, because Lebanon is unbelievably rich in water, because it's basically the Alps. The Alps continues from Europe and then ends in Lebanon, right? So Lebanon's all snow and water and rivers and stuff. And they accused Israel from stealing from the Litani river down south all of their water, right? And I don't know whether that's true or not. I'm not getting involved. So they have been attacking Israel ever since. Now, the Sunnis and the Christians up north, who are like the most right-wing Christians, they're all Semitic. In fact, they're related to me, so they look like sort of like this, but they're even lighter. They have blonde hair and whatever, and they're mix of Celtic, and they've never ever mixed with Arabs at all, and they won't let Arabs into their villages and stuff like that. They're pretty nuts. They have made an unholy alliance with the Sunni majority up north, and they want to get rid of Hezbollah because they're afraid that Hezbollah is now more powerful than the actual state of Lebanon. And if they wanted to, they could take it over. So they're the two. That's to answer your question about Hezbollah. Let's go back to chats. Okay, looks like the liberal guy. Hey, how are you this AM? Are there Middle Eastern countries with discriminatory laws against Christian? Yes, Egypt has one. Egypt is where Christians are not allowed to build churches. They're not allowed to repair churches. But having said that, there's always been a turn the blind eye. So Hosni Mubarak, who was the leader in Egypt, and Anwar Sadat, they were very pro-Christian in the sense that they allowed them freedom to represent the Christians in parliament. They would celebrate Christmas with them, with the Christians in Egypt. Sudan is worse. Sudan, I have a friend of mine in Australia who is very old. He's like nearly 100 now. And he told me that all his life in Sudan, they would come in, the Sudanese Muslims would come in and bulldoze Christian churches and then say the law doesn't allow you to rebuild them. And he said he saw this as a kid. So he's become like a militant anti-Muslim because the guy's been so traumatized. He's just obsessed. And like, even when he met me, he was afraid I was like an undercover Muslim and all this weird stuff. In Iran, actually, Christians got flogged yesterday in Iran. But I don't know if it was because they were Christian, because in Iran, Christians and Jews are allowed to have minority representations. But the fastest growing religion, you'll be fed bullshit. Yeah, well, that's true. But the thing is, other people don't know that. Let me hold up your target for a sec. Just to answer, in Iran, Christianity, there's been reports recently that, and if you go to I have a Facebook page called the Greater Syrio-Aramaic Community, and I post all this type of stuff up there on Facebook. And there was in Iran, there's been allegations of the fastest growing religion being Christianity in Iran. And that's scaring the shit out of the government. So they're now starting to persecute Christians. In America, you said nobody really in the US knows the truth. We've been fed all bullshit. Yeah, but people in the Middle East don't know that. They just think, because they don't understand how democracy works, because normally it's the leader that does everything. So when they see America doing stuff, they say Americans think what the American leader thinks. They don't get that there's different opinions. I mean, not everyone, but the average, what do you call them? The average Ahmed or whatever. All right, Saudi Arabia. My family, some of my family lived in Saudi Arabia for a long time, and they fled Saudi Arabia. But their friend was because one of them was caught holding a Bible years later, so they were able to flee back to Lebanon. But their friend got caught and has disappeared. No one knows what happened to him. That was like 40 years ago. 40 years ago. But the goal from mainstream Sunnah, or at least the extremists, has to be to rid Lebanon of Christians who hold Lebanese citizenship. That's been their goal, if that makes any sense. All right, where else? Jordan's pretty good with Christians, but there are rules. So during Ramadan, Christians are allowed to eat during the day, but it has to be behind closed doors, and the restaurant has to be licensed to serve Christians. So That's an open society in the Middle East. Just an FYI. So if anyone, yeah, if this is what I mean, like when I say stories like that, it makes me really get the shits with Americans. Just a cultural thing. Hashtag not all. Yeah, we only need 5%. But, you know, like just through education, just by me saying this is how it is in different places, it's enough for people to make up their own mind, you know. So this is why growing up, I didn't interact much with people, right? So yeah, I had no idea that other humans did not know this stuff. So I would hate Americans. I really hated Americans growing up. You have mastered sarcasm. Thank you very much, my friend. Yeah, my last girlfriend taught me sarcasm like in very embarrassing ways. Anti-Christian stone cultural sentiment. In the countries I've been to, so Syria, Lebanon is still a Christian country. So when I'm in Lebanon, it's like I'm in Europe, or actually I can't say Europe anymore, but it's basically like Australia. Like it's even more crazy than Australia, like partying every day, Monday to Sunday, it's just parties. It's awesome. But Syria and Jordan, definitely, when I was in both those countries, you can be Christian, but if you have a cross or you have a tattoo of a cross, or your name is David or Gabriel or something like that, or Daniel, you got to be careful, right? It's unspoken. You know what I mean? It's like Jews today in France, right? Like France is still France, but you got to be careful, right? It's like that, basically. Like the Christians would go in their church and they'd never like ring the bell, they'd never like jump for joy. It's like we go in, we pray, and then they just walk out like they've done something dirty, sort of, in a way. Where else? Iraq's a disaster. Iraq is a effing disaster. What happened there? Like 1.5 million Christians got massacred after George Bush invaded Iraq. Absolutely massacred. They were being kept safe by Saddam Hussein. Now keep in mind, Saddam Hussein murdered a lot of Shiites. He murdered, millions, maybe 3 million Shiite Muslims. Right? So that's once again when people talk about Islam, they don't know what they're saying, because there is no such thing. They have been killing each other since a few years after Muhammad's alleged death. Right? So yeah, the Shia allied with American devils, as they called it, to get rid of Saddam, because the war never ended between Iraq and Iran. So Iran and the Shia together supported the idiot George Bush to come in and just get revenge on the Sunnah, because the Sunnah were a minority that had the Shia oppressed that whole time. And what Saddam did, because he was an evil psychopathic genius, was that he kept his second in command as a Christian. And so he kept the Christians on his side so that the balance wouldn't tip over, because if they went with the Shia, then his whole regime could have been destroyed. But 1.5 million completely gone. Mesopotamia, the invention of the camshaft, which is, any thoughts on the US really invaded Iraq? I read documentation in Arabic when I was a kid that the goal of the US was to rid certain minorities of the Middle East. And you don't know if this is true, right? This is what I grew up on, right? So you don't know. They wanted to rid the Middle East of certain minorities so that they could have an easier way to control the place. That's, as far as I know, it's a chess game. I don't really know more than that. I know, for example, that in Israel and in Lebanon, natural gas off the Mediterranean coast has been discovered. It was discovered decades ago, but they can't extract it because the infighting, for example, the Turkish want a piece of it now because they've taken over part of Cyprus, as they took over in the 70s. The Lebanese minority in Cyprus is getting slaughtered by the Turkish, the Maronites basically, which are the largest minority in Cyprus, the Maronites. You've got in Lebanon, you've got the Shia, the Sunnah, the Druze, the Christian. There's 17 sects all in Lebanon, and like this tiny little drop, all wanting to fight for the oil, for the thing. I don't know. America sells weapons to Qatar and to Saudiyin, and Qatar has been sending its weapons to Hamas, which has been fighting Israel, but at the same time they have business dealings with Israel. Who knows? It's too confusing. I can only talk about the individual motives of each faction. Yeah, the whole thing's a mess. You know, you've got now Turkey's in a civil war almost, because you've got 23,000 Muslims, 15,000 Muslims. Yeah, and Turkey's almost in a civil war. Yeah, because basically the true leader of Turkey for liberals, and I'm biased because I'm a liberal, so the true leader for Turkey, as I see it, is Fethullah Gulen. And Fethullah Gulen is being kept in Philadelphia under military protection, and he's been there for decades, since I was a kid. He's been in the US. And he allegedly has been trying to lead coups to take over the current right-wing conservative government, which is looking, he's near you, there you go. The government at the moment led by Erdogan, which is trying to Islamize Europe. And in fact, as I've told people before, on Memory TV, MEMRI, I think it's memorytv.org, he has very strong support. He's got massively strong support. You can see it actually on Periscope. He's got massive support on Periscope with liberal Turkish. But, you know, Turkey's divided. You've got half of them who are, I mean, I don't know the actual distribution, but it looks like there's half who are conservative, who want to Islamize the rest of Turkey and Europe, because, as I said on memorytv.org, Erdogan says in Turkish that his goal is to Islamize Europe. And when he says Islamize, it means his version, which is the worst possible version, right? It's exactly like the version that Simon teaches about. So that's what he's trying to do. And he's on the side of America. He's a member of NATO. It was obvious to us, and I'm sure to you as well, like when the Arab Spring came up, my dad and I were having coffee. And we just looked at each other and we knew what was coming. Like, it was so obvious. And the thing is, to people who are from the Middle East, it's so obvious that it's hard to understand how it's not obvious to the West. So therefore it's easy to hate Americans if you're in the Middle East, because they think they can't not know. Queen Latifah must know. She must have known that getting rid of Mubarak was going to bring in the Akhwan al-Muslimin, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. They must have known that. It was so obvious, right? Clearly it wasn't obvious. That's hard for me to wrap my head around, that it's not obvious to people. But I've come to learn that there's a lot of things not obvious to me either. So you live and learn. Anyway, yeah, so Turkey, there's a fight between the liberals and the conservatives, and that fight is getting a bit murderous, actually. I think more than 8,000 judges. Actually, you were there, actually, Queen Latifah. You and I spoke when I was doing gym that time. And I was talking about how 8,000 judges were arrested after the coup by Erdogan, and no one knows where they are now. They've been arrested, they've been put in torture cells. So his government is probably imploding. Yeah. I would say it's imploding. There'll be another coup at some point. Yeah, I don't know. I saw some interviews with some really awesome liberal Egyptians. Memory TV is the best. If you want to go see Memory TV, they have the best stuff. Like, they have like Islamists, extremists, ice creamists. They have what's his face? They have like awesome liberal Muslim guys who like say the best stuff in the world. Tamara's here. Yeah, you watch it frequently. Yeah, it's pretty good. They have some shuyukh, which is a plural of sheikh, but they have a sheikh from Saudi Arabia who he's on a hit list because he's been talking about how women should be in government and how has he taken those people's families are going to be pissed. Yeah, pretty much, but it's like in America, right? Like, if you go and protest something, what happens? Yeah. Well, bad is corruption, but I don't know how many of them were liberal. Yeah, I never saw the ones I saw on Arabic TV. They were not liberals. They wanted him out because they wanted the Akhwan al-Muslimin in. But I don't know. I wasn't there on the ground, so I can't comment. But yeah, it could be exactly what you said. I can't comment on that. Yeah. Anyway, I got to get back to my physics, guys. So it was a pleasure to talk to you all. And thank you to Queen Notifa for bringing up the topic. And if you want to know the story of me in the Middle East and Australia, go pre-order the damn book, because we need another 220 pre-orders to get the book out. www.gofundme.com/GAbSmacked. Good to see you, Dimitrios Elare. Talk to you. My pleasure. I'll see some of you on the physics channel.